So, hello everyone, and welcome to yet another session of Apex at Home. It is my great pleasure to introduce Matt Nolan from FOEX. Matt and I both grew up in the same town in Australia, and I'm not going to steal any more of your thunder. With that, I'm going to hand it straight over to you, Matt.
Thanks, David. Thanks everybody for having me. It's actually quite an honour to be on the list of presenters today. I'm here to actually talk about building single-page applications in Apex. To give you some background about myself, as David mentioned, I am Australian, but the different thing about me is that I live in Finland now. So it's not exactly where most Australians tend to migrate to, but I can say that living in Finland, is pretty cool. I get to go skiing a fair bit, and if you're wondering what the weather is like here at the moment, this is the third week of spring. Let me just pull up a picture. All right, I took that just outside the house this morning. So, and we've got this sort of snow each night for the last 3 days. So summer's really warming up. So looking forward to it. Also, about myself, my wife is Finnish. That's why I live in Finland. I also have 4 children. So that keeps me very busy. I was talking to David earlier about my lovely artwork, but I cannot take credit for that. That is actually my children's artwork. And we also foster another girl as well. So pretty busy. It's 8 p.m. here in Finland at the moment. So normally at this time I'm putting the kids to bed. Unfortunately, I won't be doing that tonight. Unfortunately for them, fortunately for me, I am doing the presentation because I don't know what everybody thinks about putting kids to bed, but it's not the easiest job in the world. So anyway, with that said, let me get started. I'm going to play the presentation now. So about our company, FOEX, we're actually specialized in Apex. We've been around for about 8 years now, and we focus basically on building very complex user interfaces for very data-centric, data-heavy applications. We focus on forms migrations. We focus on legacy desktop applications migrating to the web, e-business suite extensions, mostly back office systems. Okay, and we use Apex, and then we have a bunch of tools that we have which we help create these complex interfaces using the same principles of Apex, which is declarative development. So it's fast. All right, so today I'm here to talk about a SPA. What is a SPA? Why you want to use a SPA, and what the benefits we're going to get from a SPA. And if this is the picture you got in your mind when I'm talking about a SPA, unfortunately, I'm not going to be talking about one of these today. As you can see, this is a picture taken in quarantine as well. There's no one there. But today I'm going to be talking about something much cooler, which you saw from the title of the presentation, which is building single-page applications in Apex. All right, so the context of today's talk is about business application development, data-centric applications, that is. When you hear about single-page applications, a lot of the time they're talking really more about websites and stuff like that. So just to focus today, it's actually about our business applications and not website development. So in terms of applications, over the years, there's an ever-growing demand for them to be much more sophisticated because we're moving basically everything to the web. So that means that we've done all the easy stuff, and now it's the hard stuff that's getting migrated, so things are getting a lot more complex. When we take on these big projects, we tend to overrun our budgets. And then that cycles into, well, hey, we need to actually build this quicker to avoid running over budget. And then once we can build stuff quicker, then obviously the demand is to still create even more complex things, and we get into a cyclical loop here. So in order to beat that issue, we just need better tools. So if we talk about single-page application development and we look at the timeline of JavaScript and the frameworks that are out there to actually build single-page applications, well, the design concept itself actually didn't emerge until around 2008, 2009. It was, around slightly before that, but it was really coined around that time. If we have a look at multi-page application development, that was basically around since the beginning of the web. So it's really like 10 years later that, or 10, 15 years later, that the single page design actually emerged. So we have frameworks like Angular, Knockout, which is part of Oracle Jet. We've got Ember. We've also got React now. There's Vue, newer ones. So obviously this is a little bit outdated, this slide, but Oracle's introduced Oracle Jet around 2016. And there's even newer ones coming out as well. So one that's not on there, which I'm actually quite keen about myself, is a framework called Svelte. And more so because it's actually a compiler rather than a framework. So, but coming back to about building single page applications, JavaScript now, and because of this moving to the web, is now the #1 development language used by developers. And if we look at the other ones that are close behind it, we're looking at HTML, CSS, and SQL. So if you're an Apex developer, basically you're in good stead here, because the top skills are really web development skills, and that's what you're doing as developers. You might not be doing that much JavaScript, but you're definitely doing a lot of SQL, and you'll do a little bit of CSS as well. So JavaScript is king. So because of that, modern browsers have actually gotten so much better. When we talk about the capabilities of what modern browsers can do, when we talk about WebGL, when we talk about Canvas, when we talk about service workers, web workers, WebGL, there's so many capabilities of browsers now that they're almost like operating systems. Okay, and obviously we've thrown off the shackles of being bound by IE. So if we were to go back 10, 11 years ago, IE actually had a 70% market share. And so that meant we were kind of restricted building applications based on IE standards, which weren't basically web standards. There was slight differences when supporting IE. I've just updated this, and basically Chrome's come down a little bit, and Safari's gone up. So the previous one was from last year, and this is from just yesterday that I took the screenshot. So because modern browsers have gotten so good, we've had the rise of the JavaScript frameworks. So what are these frameworks that are at the top of the list? And we're looking at Node.js, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. And then we're looking at Angular, which is very popular, and React as well. And things like .NET and Java's not even, like registering there on some of the Java frameworks. We've just got .NET coming in the 4th place. So really everything is now about JavaScript. So if we're talking about, well, what sort of applications can actually be built with JavaScript? And I'm not sure how many of you are aware of, but Skype, Slack for the desktop, Visual Studio Code, or the Atom editor are actually all built and written in JavaScript and HTML. Okay, and they use a product called Electron, which is very similar to Cordova or PhoneGap for wrapping web applications and have them natively installed on phones and tablets. And for the desktop, well, we've got Electron, which does the same. So Visual Studio Code actually is a web application running on your desktop if you're using it, and most developers do. So it's just to say that, JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, what you can do with it, you can actually eclipse the capabilities of desktop technologies. So it's very mature now. So when we talk about design patterns for building applications, there are basically two. There's only two. There's the single page application design style, which is what I'm talking about today. And then there's the other one, which is multi-page application design. And if you're an Apex developer, well, then you know what multi-page application design is, because you're doing it day in, day out, because that's what Apex is. So when we look at choosing, whether we should choose one style or the other, it really depends on the requirements of the application. Also, of course, it does depend on the skills of the developer too. But if you're looking for a very rich, complex user interface, you're going to want to build that with a single page application design style. Whereas, for simple applications, it's going to be overkill. And you'll probably find that 80 to 90% of applications can be built with the multi-page application design style. But they're all the simpler type apps. And believe it or not, that last 10%, 10-15% of apps that get built in a single page application design style, these are the really big ones. These are the complex ones. And from a weighting perspective, you could almost, equally balance them, even though it's 10 to 15%. The size of them and the complexity of them, just dwarfs the simple applications that we built. So this information came from Microsoft as well, by the way. So if we talk about the multi-page design style, basically what's happening is, when we render an Apex page, we basically fetch it. We issue a GET request through the browser, which hits the database. It returns a full HTML page, which then gets rendered. Okay, so basically that HTML is generated on the server, and that HTML is returned to the client and shown. All right, so when you have to make changes, and if you've got a form on there, you want to save some data, you're going to submit that page by another post request. It's then going to hit the database, and then it's going to regenerate the HTML to send back to you to repaint the screen. So what happens in this particular process is we lose the context of where we are, and we actually find ourselves, firing off many requests for, like all the images or the scripts that are, or the CSS or any files that are listed in the web page. From the single page application design style, it's a little bit different. Basically, when you start your application, you start with a very lightweight HTML page, which then fetches data from the database via an AJAX request. All right, and that data is being returned in JSON format. Okay, and then you've got this data then being merged into client-side HTML templates that are stored in JavaScript. So what that means is that when we're fetching stuff from the server, we're fetching smaller amounts of information because we don't have all that markup generated around it. It's also simpler as we're just fetching the data. And because we're not repainting the screen, we're keeping the context, so it's not interrupting the user, when they're interacting in the application. And it is a bit of a lighter workload, but the application is much more chatty as well, because you'll have a lot more requests just fetching small pieces of information from the database. It'll make more sense when I actually jump into a demo of it. But when we look at what type of framework Apex is, well, Apex has been around since 1999. I'm not sure if you caught Joel's talk earlier, but he was showing, when Mike actually, wrote the first line of Apex code. I can't remember actually the date. It might have been June in 1999. But anyway, over the time period, Apex is getting much more advanced. Okay, with the introduction of the interactive grid, it's now introducing this kind of like single page design style where the interactive grid, it's only fetching its data from the database now and merging that data into client-side templates. So it's taking on some of these features of single page design, and again with the LOV as well that's been introduced in 19.2. So they're starting to move towards this type of style. But because Apex was designed back in 1999, it is a multi-page application framework. So what I'm going to do here, because I've got a video and I know that's not displaying very well, I'm just going to open it externally. All right, so hopefully this plays all right for everybody. I'm not sure, I had some problems when I was testing, so let's see how we go. All right, but an experience in a regular Apex app, we've just got the sample database application here. It's just to say, hey, we're looking at orders. We've got to check a particular order. We're going to bring up the order details. We can see on the right-hand side all our requests that are getting fired, but we then need to jump back and check the customer details. Then we go in and we have a look at our particular customer. We've got to find them, locate them. Then we have a look at their details, and then we've got to jump back to the order because we've got to process that order or provide some information to someone. And so what we're doing here with the jumping around and having to locate these records and stuff, and this is in a simple data set, is that we're losing our context as we're doing that and jumping around, and we're having to relocate that data regularly. So of course you could design the application a little bit different so that it's not as so it's not jumping around as much as what we're doing here, but this is just to point out what it means of losing your context from an end user point of view, and how it does slow us down when we're needing to check multiple pieces of information. All right, so let me jump back into the presentation. All right, so what are some of the design negatives about multi-page application development? Well, the number one is it's not a natural design pattern. It's been adapted for the web. So, we never built desktop applications like this. I'm pretty sure people would be quite frustrated if their applications behaved in this manner, especially for, very complex operations that people need to perform, which is why it's not handling UI complexity very well, because everything's being rendered, fetched, and losing that context. So it really, causes a degrade. It can cause a degrade in productivity, and it's less efficient in a way of we're fetching over and over. Like if we need to make a small change, we're changing someone's name, and then we have to repaint the entire screen, and we could have quite a few things on that screen that we're looking at that have been drilled down or fetched or anything like that. And then if we needed to get back to that context, we've got to then program how to do all that, and that can get quite complicated too, just because of the fact that we're having to submit and reload the page. The other thing that we have in this sort of design style is this whole thing of shared components and shared navigation, header and footers across all our pages. So it's something that we need to take into account of when do we include that on a particular page and when we don't include that, depending on how we're designing the application. And we'll have a look at that in a bit more detail. So to get your head around single page design style, to get around building applications as well, basically how we're building our Apex applications is kind of like we're building a browser with no tabs, basically. So I'm not sure how many people have been around as long as I have, or even longer, but when we first had browse the internet, the browser that we had, you would change the URL to navigate to a different website. So basically the workaround back then was, well, hey, just open multiple applications, like to work around that. And the thing is, did they stick with that, workaround, just say, hey, do that? No, they decided to improve the experience and add tabs to browsing. And basically, when we have to keep changing our context all the time, we are suffering from productivity. People want to be able to see multiple sets of data at the same time. So if we're to have a look at the SPA concept, all right, so it's when we navigate in our app, is that we dynamically load content, and then we interact with that content, we drill it down, we get to a certain area, we interact, open up, navigate to different sorts of things. We're looking at customer order information here. We're then drilling down even further, and again, changing the context of the data that we're looking at. All right, and then we can jump back and we can just see the information and the context that we had it before. All right, and that's what the single page design style is doing for us. It's keeping more content open for us, and also keeping that content in place for where we'd actually, filtered and got it down to. So that, increases the user's productivity when using the application. So basically, what I'm trying to set up as an analogy is you know, single page application development is like a browser with tabs. So we're able to open more, we're able to get more done. I'm a person myself who, as you can see from the screenshot, loves to have a lot of tabs open. Not everybody's the same. It can get a little bit confusing for some people, but you know, like at least having a couple tabs open is much more productive than if you aren't able to have any open. So our productivity goes up when we design our applications this way. So if we have a look at some real world examples, obviously I can't get a show of hands of who uses Gmail, but Gmail is widely used by a lot of people now, a lot of businesses, you know, and it's a single page application. Okay, and basically when I ask this question at conferences, who's using a desktop client to manage their email, there's not many hands that get raised. Most people are using the web version of Gmail. And because it's a single page application and it does the job well. You know, we basically don't submit anything. We don't reload the page. We have these modal regions on the page, which we can put information into. We can interact, get everything done very efficiently. And that's because of the design style. If this was a multi-page application and we had to jump around and move, you know, like if we edited or viewed an email and then we repainted the page and we had to jump back, you know, we wouldn't enjoy that experience and we would probably find ourselves using a desktop email client. But this is where single page applications style, you know, allows us to actually be, you know, much more efficient in the app and enjoy the experience because it's much more a natural application experience. So it's going to give us faster access to our data because we're able to see that data, we're able to drill into it and keep that context, you know, resulting in a better user experience. You know, it increases the productivity and more resource efficient. So it's basically everything that I've been sort of summarizing, hammering onto you about. All right, so what is an SPA user experience like for everybody, every Apex developer? And, you know, I think the best way to do that is to show you the page designer. So, you know, like I said before, Apex is introducing these single page design aspects, you know, into Apex slowly. And the page designer is a perfect example. So this is another time too where I'd ask people, you know, like who used to build applications prior to Apex 5, prior to the introduction of the page designer. And I would ask of those people who raise their hands, who are now using Apex 5 and above, who wants to go back to building applications that way, and no one wants to. And the reason is you know, for things like this. So when we're navigating around in the builder, you know, we can look at all our dynamic actions, processes, we jump back, we can quickly move around. If we want to make bulk changes to all our items, we can do that extremely quickly. Make a change, we save it, we don't lose our context, it's kept, everything's where it is. Okay, and you know, we're able to carry on with the work that we're doing, you know, whether it's then jumping into and making changes to dynamic actions. And again, when we're saving, you know, everything's remaining in place. So the page designer has made us so much more productive as developers. And of course, my only bugbear with Page Designer is, you know, why aren't we able to edit more of the Apex stuff in a similar design style? So when we go to shared components, you know, it's a bit of a disruption when we're in the Page Designer to jump to shared components and then go into lists and manage everything through the old style. You know, the Page Designer experience is really nice and what we all, you know, think allows us to get the job done quicker. So that's an experience that we're using every day. So basically, let's just quickly navigate through here. So if I've convinced everybody to want to have a look at building a single page application, you know, how do you go about doing it? And basically, well, you know, you've got to use one of these frameworks in order to build it. So you're not going to actually try and do anything, you know, from vanilla code. You know, it's you know, things are advanced and you know, reinvent the wheel. So obviously you've got to make a choice. Excuse me. out of all these frameworks to choose from. And of course, the thing about all these JavaScript frameworks, and which you saw in the timeline, there's always new ones coming out, and it's very difficult to know what to choose. But obviously, you want to go for something popular. So things like React and Vue these days is much more popular. But one thing I haven't got on the screen here, but which is becoming more popular too, which is the newest kid on the block, which is Svelte, which is a bit different to these frameworks. So these frameworks worked in that way that I talked about, where they're doing all the templating. Their React uses a virtual DOM to do a whole bunch of performance things to make sure it's not having to actually update and do a lot of changes actually in the actual DOM. That's the document object model of your HTML page. So it's trying to be more efficient, but with the way that it goes about doing it, there's an overhead to it. Whereas a new framework like Svelte is actually a compiler, so it just compiles your app into vanilla JavaScript. So there's no dependency on libraries. There's no virtual DOM. It's able to do everything that it needs to, and it's much more performant. But like I said, there's probably going to be something after Svelte that comes along too that's even better than that. So what we find ourselves when we get into it and having a look at these frameworks and going down that path, I have seen some developers very interested in React.js, some Apex developers. Vincent Mornio from INSA has also done some presentations on it. So when you get into, building these single page applications, you also need to know all these additional tools around it, build tools, scaffolding tools, package managers. There's quite a bit to take into it. So there's a steep learning curve, and when you start building it, there's a lot to take in. And it's funny because I'm bringing up a survey that was done by Pitts when they talked to their own customers about what sort of technology do they see in their future for forms developers, for their customer base of forms. And Apex is lower down than what AngularJS and Jet is. So a lot of people are attracted to this single page design style, and they go down the path of writing a lot of code. And when they write a lot of code, I mean, they write a lot of code. Like if you see on the screen there, that is a hell of a lot of code. And there's also all these things that you need to start learning about too, which is, MVC, which is Model View Controller design paradigm, or a newer one, which is Model View View Model. You need to know things about inheritance, polymorphism, mix-ins, promises, deferreds, things about bindings, lazy rendering, lazy loading. There's so many things to take into account, and it takes a while before you can master this stuff. It takes years. And the big thing about when we write all this code is, basically the industry average is about 15 to 50 errors per 1,000 lines of code. Now, the thing about these applications is that, your application is not 1,000 lines of code. When you build a single page application, it might be 50,000, it might be 100,000, it might be several hundred thousand. So when you look at how many errors are going to come out with the amount of code that you're going to write, that's a lot of bugs that you're going to have to fix and investigate and spend that time working out what's going on. And you might be inheriting other people's code that they've written, trying to work out how that they've gone and done it. So basically, that's a big cost as well in time. And those bugs also, they make their way into production. And then there is that stress and stuff like that as well as solving them when, you've got serious issues with availability, depending on who you work for and what that application is supporting. So when we build single page applications, it's not like Apex. It's going to cost a lot, and it's going to take a lot longer. So, like that first initial screen that I showed you about the requirements of building more complex applications, we don't want them to take longer. We don't want them to cost more. So obviously, instead of writing all that code, then we're going to look back at productivity tools and IDEs. And, Oracle's got the Visual Builder Cloud service that you could use, which is based on top of Oracle Jet. So it's a drag and drop, interface. It's a, a 4GL builder. But the thing about that is once you get to a certain point where you need to actually change some of the code, you need to understand how to write Oracle Jet code and how to change it. So that can be a bit of a drawback, and it's the same with the other frameworks as well. So whilst they get you to a certain level, you've still probably got to know the technology under it. Things like OutSystems are great though for mobile apps as well, I would say. But in our opinion, and I'm pretty sure in all of your opinions too, because you're, pretty much everyone dialed in is Apex developer. Apex is a wonderful framework, very productive environment, but a very flexible one too. So why would we want to use Apex for single page application development? Well, for many reasons is that, remember when we talked about the percentage of applications that we're going to build in the single page design style, like it's a smaller percentage. So basically we can actually build more types of applications if we use Apex. So we can build all the multi-page applications, but then we could also build the single page ones as well. So we can, actually, cater for the full amount of apps that we could build. And the thing about it, Apex is, like it's easy for beginners to get started because it's low code, because it's declarative, because it's got all these things already available for us, because it's got a great PL SQL API, because it's got a decent JavaScript API. Okay, and most of the things that we need for, regular standard applications are provided for us. And then obviously if we want to look at single page things, that's more for the experts. And the one thing that Apex does is, with the plugin architecture, Apex is extendable. It was extendable before the plugin architecture came in. The plugin architecture just, gave us a very structured way of doing that integration and, providing a declarative way within the builder of adding those plugins to a page. So Apex caters for the spectrum of skill sets. So, and that's what we need from to be productive, and with our development team is to have the juniors, the mid-range developers, and the seniors, because they're the best teams. You don't want a team of experts. If you've got a full team of experts, it's hard to get a lot of things done because everybody wants to do it their way and they don't give in. And the thing about Apex is we can do more with less people too. So, it's got a lot of great things going for it. It's also extremely unique. There's no other framework out there like it because it's metadata driven. So like the database actually has a data dictionary to manage itself. Well, your Apex applications are stored in a data dictionary as well in tables. So that means that we can query the page to find out about, well, what's actually on the page. And we can do that at the time of rendering. And we can do that at the time of processing. So it gives us a lot of dynamic control and understanding so that we can build a lot of intelligence into it. That's something that is not really promoted a lot, but as developers, we need to solve problems, and the design of Apex allows us to solve many, many problems much easier than other tools. Like I said, we can go from low code or to full control. Even the builder, like I'm not sure how many people are aware of when we talk about modern browsers, you can build browser extensions. So you can actually extend the builder, with your own code as well. And there's something that I'm going to show you at the end of the presentation of how we can do that. And again, like I said, it's got a huge API because it's 20 years old now, and we can extend it. And the reason why we want to use Apex is because we're going to deliver for productivity reasons in hours and days and not weeks and months. And we saw that from Joel's presentation of just how quickly the Apex team could spit out that COVID-19 application tracker, that's vital for, the American community. And, obviously the biggest thing that business businesses want is time to market, faster time to market, and also a reduced development cost, and also the ongoing maintenance. So it's a no-brainer to be using Apex. So let's jump into our first demo of can I build a single page application in Apex with or without custom code? So let's see how far we can get with just doing a little bit. All right, so let's jump into our first demo. I have to say I really like dark mode that's been introduced in 19.1. Okay, so we've just got the sample database application. All right, it behaves like the regular sample database application. If we're to look at customers, we jump to the customer screen, we jump back to the home page. All right, so how would we sort of change this to make it more like a single page application? All right, and the first thing that we can do, hold on, just got the thing in the way, the toolbar. Just give me 1 second, move that out of the way. Okay, so if we jump into the app builder, if we look at page 1, I mean, the first thing we can do is, and what we want to do is take away this navigation on the left-hand side. All right, and obviously in 20.1, what's coming in is like a mega menu, so that's probably going to be a better way for us, to manage our navigation. But to make it a single page design style, we're just going to go to the page settings, and we're going to change the page template to minimal no navigation. So if I just come in, zoom in there. All right, so we're just going to set the template to that. All right, and we're just going to have a look and see what the change is. And when we run the page, we've basically got the sample database application happening here. All right, and now obviously when we jump to customers, we're still jumping back to the navigation. So what we want to do is obviously stay on the same page. So when we're on here, we don't want to navigate away. That's the design concept. So what can we do in Apex to avoid that? And we can simply change that customers page, okay, which is page 2, to the modal dialog. All right, so we just go into page 2, and then we just change the page mode. So if I just zoom in again here, we're just changing it to modal dialog. The good thing about Apex is it's quite intelligent. It knows that because it's a modal dialog, I can just save that, and it'll take care of the rest for us. So it'll do the popping up of the modal dialog when we click on that link now. So just by that one small change, now when we click on customers, we're popping that up in the modal dialog. Okay, and so when we're making changes, if we're to jump on over here, everything we're popping up in modal dialogs. If I make some changes here, all right, you'll now see we've just refreshed that little bit of information there. Okay, so you can see we just updated Eugene's name to a horrible garbled name, but it's just to show that we didn't repaint the page, we just refreshed it. And how we go about doing that is just through a very simple dynamic action. All right, which is on page 1. All right, which is on dialog closed events. We can refresh top customers, top products. All right, and how we do that is just over here on the dialog closed event. Okay, and then we simply just run a simple refresh of our region. Okay, and that's the great thing about events and stuff like that and dynamic actions. So if we're to talk about design concepts, coming back to when we were looking at that screen of MVC, how I like to picture Apex from an MVC point of view is dynamic actions are the controller logic. All right, your regions are the view logic or the view. All right, and your data or the model is basically the SQL queries that are defined, within your regions, within a grid or a report. Okay, so that's a very simple thing, but if we go back and just have a look at what's actually happening behind the scenes here, if we just inspect how is Apex actually doing this, loading, page 2 into page 1. All right, and if we just, let me just make it a bit more readable. If we just scroll up a little bit here, all right, and if you have a look at where the cursor is, it's actually loading it with an iframe. Okay, so we're actually able to load page 2 into an iframe, which is sitting in that modal dialog. So that's actually how Apex is kind of, is doing the single page design style. So the iframe technique is one technique. The traditional or the JavaScript framework way of doing it is to load everything into the current page so that there's no iframes, because I'll explain a little bit later why iframes aren't the best way to achieve it, but it works fine for standard Apex. Most of you as Apex developers might not even know that. It just works and you're happy with it, and that's the way. So that's what we can get with basically out of the box, no changes. But the problem we've got when we go down this path is that then we've sort of got to start throwing more on the main page, and we're adding charts, and we're adding calendars, and we're adding trees, and all of a sudden we start to put too much on the page. It becomes bloated. Your whole application's almost moved onto one page, and it becomes a bit of a maintenance nightmare. It's also slower to load, those sorts of things. So you need to be careful with the design choice, and there's a limit that we get to it, but it's a good way. And you see with the way that they're building the sample database application that they're using the dialogue quite regularly. So it's a nice little hybrid way of achieving some of those single page design aspects. All right, but if we were to take this a little step further of showing multiple pages basically at the same time, just going to move this toolbar out of the way again. Okay, so I'll just jump into our second application. All right, I better hurry up because I can see the time. I'm starting to run out. David hasn't warned me. But in our second one, basically what we've done is on page one, we've added a region here, an iframe region. Okay, if we just have a look at over here. Okay, so we're going to load our content into the iframe. We're just going to use a dynamic action to do that. All right, so on click. All right, and unfortunately, Apex doesn't provide many event hooks for us to, with their components. So we've got to sort of do it at a lower jQuery selector way. But here, if we just zoom in here, we're just looking at the tree navigation and anchor links defined in that tree navigation. And what are we going to do? We're just going to basically prevent the default action and set the iframe URL. All right, so let's just run that. Okay, and so now these pages that we've got, we've stripped off all the shared components, and now when we click on products, we're loading just that page in the iframe. Okay, so if we were to have a look at page 2 just to see what it looks like, if we were to run it standalone. Okay, so you can see that there's no navigation and stuff like that, but we're not actually really winning anything by just not having to repeat the navigation. Okay, so whilst we're not navigating away from our main page, which is the design style, we're not really benefiting from that. So we need tabs, at the end of the day. All right, so we jump into our next application. All right, and we have a look at how far we can get with tabbed iframes. So Apex has a tab container. So if we have a look and see how the design of the page is. All right, so we can have a look here. Here we've got our tabs container. All right, and how that's actually done is we just use the template tabs container. Okay, and then we just use child regions below here. Okay, so we've got home, customers, products. How does that look when we run the page? Okay, so our single page app, it looks very similar to the regular sample database application, but now we have the tab. So when we click on customers, we're actually loading customers into that tab, and then we're loading products into this tab. So we're able to keep both pages open. Okay, but unfortunately, there's limits to Apex, and we can't dynamically add tabs. Unfortunately, that capability is not there. So you find that you're going to have to start writing code workarounds, and there's also little quirky things too when we start going down this path of if I don't click on the right area, you know, basically I go to the wrong, I just go to the page instead of capturing that link click, you know, with that dynamic actions, it's missed, and it just, you know, redirects the page to this. So you find, you know, when you're writing, you know, your dynamic actions, you know, you're starting to have to write a bit more code. So over here, you know, we're basically just setting the source of the iframe. We're also having to trigger our tab container to make sure that we select it. And then we've also got to look at resizing the iframe as well. So, you know, we start to write a bit of custom code. And that's about as far as we can get before we actually go down the path of writing too much code and getting ourselves into a mess. So realistically, we can't progress that far, you know, with writing custom code. Okay, so we hit a limit in Apex is what I'm really saying. All right, so I'll quickly jump back to the presentation. All right, so basically what I would say is just stick to this design paradigm, which is just to use modal dialogues. All right, you can also stretch to fit the window for the template options for the dialogue. And then obviously when we close the dialogue, just refreshing the regions behind it. Okay, so that's what I recommend. If you want to go down the iframe path, well, here's a little bit of code and HTML for it, but I kind of wouldn't recommend doing it. There is an upside for using iframes, though. It works best for regular Apex pages. It's the easiest way to do a single page application design style. And it's transparent to the end user. All right, the downside is it takes a little bit longer to add an iframe to the page. You're still doing all your HTTP requests. It's difficult to communicate across pages because you will need to do that. And you will have potential session state issues because the good thing about this style is you can open the same page multiple times, but when you have application items, it's basically the last page open has the right context and the other one's opened stale, so you can get session state issues. So you need to be aware of that and defining your session state accordingly, or your page item, application item design accordingly. And here, you know, the biggest limit is we can't dynamically add tabs. And the Apex, looking at adding that capability, the tabs container widget is actually, you know, 600 lines of code about there, and it's not extendable. So you would have to write your own implementation, which is even longer. So that's just a workaround. So we could do it the easy way, you know, and stick to what we've done and build multi-page applications, but we're not really ticking the box for being able to handle really complex application development. So, you know, we can go down the path of integrating a framework and do it the hard way, but the hard way can actually become the easy way. All right, and we're back at this problem of choosing which framework we should use. For us as a company, we chose a framework called Sencha EXTJS, and we undertook this exercise back in 2011 and 12. So at that time, you know, if we go back, you know, there weren't many choices. You know, Angular was very new and it didn't have everything that we needed. The thing about EXTJS is it provided all the components. It was a monolithic framework. It provided everything that you needed to build business applications. So it was a bit of a no-brainer. And the documentation was very good for it. All right, so I want to show you how you can build single-page applications using plugins. All right, so I'll quickly run our demo. So we built just 2 plugins to do this. Okay. It does rely on having a bunch of other plugins as well, I will say, but hold on, I've just gone to the wrong application. All right, so basically we're going to start with, sorry, page 11. All right, and on page 11, we've just got a chart. So I'm just going to run the page. Okay, so I've just got a basic Oracle Jet chart on here. All right, and we've introduced a region plugin. If we have a look at the attributes here, so we have a content loader region plugin. If we just have a look over here. All right, and what that's going to do is load content into the box, the area that it takes up. And if you have a look at the settings here, it's the same as the Apex settings. Do we want to, what page are we going to open? You know, what's our request? What items are we going to set? Those sorts of things. So it's very familiar. Just for demo purposes, these have been pre-created to hurry things up. If you're wondering why I'm sort of speeding up, it's because I'm desperately running out of time. So we probably won't have much time for questions. So I'll just clear those selections, save that. All right, so when I run the app now, basically what we've got is we've got our one chart here, but now we've got two regions that have been loaded. Okay, and as we load these regions, seems to be something slightly off with my demo here. But the point I want to make is that we've loaded 2 pages in here, and we're able to, you know, to drill down those 2 regions. We actually have a master detail relationship on that page to be able to provide that interactivity. And how we do that is, you know, just through declarative settings. Okay, but the thing is that we've loaded page 12 and page 13 into page 11. Okay, and then I'm going to jump on to page 10, all right, and just show you how this cascading effect happens for building single page applications. All right, is up the top here is we've got our content loader region, all right, and we're loading page 11 here. Okay, so if I just take the condition off that. All right, so if I run the page, okay, we're going to load page 11 into the top section, which is then going to load, you know, page 11, page 12, page 13. And the thing about, you know, pulling in these pages, pulling in these components from other pages is the reusability factor. Is basically our controller logics on the main page that we pull things into. So we can actually reuse these, you know, regions throughout our application. And the thing here is that we can have, you know, all the dynamic characteristics of cross-page communication because everything's on the same page, basically. All right, so that's the region. All right, so that's one type of plugin that we've defined, which is just suck in a page into a particular region. But now what we want to do is similar to how we build, you know, just a regular Apex application. All right, is that we have our navigation on the left, and you know we have our center information here. What I'm going to do is just load the content into the center here. So I'm going to load page 10, which is going to pull page 11, 12, and 13 into page 1, basically, which is what we're showing here. And how we do that is with a dynamic action, which we listen to on menu item click in our navigation region. Okay, so that's a great thing about using events, just having that targeted action capability. Okay, and then we're using a content loader dynamic action here where, you know, we're going to load the content using the triggering element, which happens to be the menu item, which has the, you know, URL in it. Otherwise, we could specify a custom URL if we wanted to. Okay, but let me just save that and run. All right, so now when I click on the city demo, we're going to pull in our page into page 1. All right, so we're loading the chart, we're loading page 12, 13, all into page 1. Okay, and then here we have our tabs at the top. So when we open more content, okay, we're just opening it in a new tab, okay, which we can then interact with this content as well. And then we can jump back and we've still got a context here. So when we're jumping between screens, you know, we're not reloading anything. So that's where the user starts to get the productivity benefits of their application. So if I just then take it a notch up, just to quickly show.
We've got very little time left here, Matt, but I've got a couple of quick questions when you're done with this bit.
Well, I'll wrap it up because it's not fair that I overrun. So I don't want to do that. Okay, so I'll just stop the presentation there. Unfortunately, yeah, I got a little bit carried away in the beginning with talking about things in a bit too much detail. So quickly fire away with one of the questions.
Okay, a
David.
couple of quick questions here. So, does using breadcrumbs instead of tabs come under SPA design?
It really depends. You can add some of that capability in. Usually, how that's sort of done is through routing. So that's a big topic in itself, is how you navigate through your application through a single page design style. So you use routing to do that, and you can build that routing into the breadcrumb, but that will be a custom component.
Sure. Another question here from Vahad. Is there any security issues if I use dynamic actions to insert data into a table instead of using the page submission process?
There's no difference. Obviously, all your security should be on the back end, because remember, everybody can tamper with the front end. So you got to make sure you have a good authorization, a good secure frame, on the back end, checking your data that's coming in. What we do is the same thing as what the regular Apex processing, DML automatic processing is that we run through a whole range of security checks based on authorizations on grid columns, page items, checking read-only states, checking checksums. You can use checksums, protecting items, those sorts of things. So it's basically relying on the frameworks that you build to do it, or your code, but you must ensure that you add security in.
Excellent.
All right.
And the last question, because we're all but out of time here, is if you're using region display selectors, is that under SPA design or not really?
Region display selectors, like within regular Apex application, it's a way of just arranging your content on the page, but because everything's pulled in there at the time of page render, I'm not sure about latest version of Apex with the interactive grid, whether it lazy loads, if that is in a region display selector and it's not shown on page load. I'm not sure. Hopefully it does. So if it does, there's some aspect in there if you're using the interactive grid, but for everything else, it's loaded at page render time. So it's all it is really just arranging the screen, and is not really a SPA thing. SPA is really about dynamically loading content. Okay.
And I think that's one of the key things that people need to take away, is it's not just that the fact that everything's on one page, it's how you load the page and how you interact with the page, right?
Well, that's right. It's sort of like how you'll structure the design of it, how you'll pull things in. It just gives you more capabilities of designing much more complex type pages. Unfortunately, I ran out of time. I could have, shown a bit more things to explain things better, but it is what it is. Okay, thank you, everybody. It's been wonderful, and yep, I hope you stay on for the next presentation. And